thank you for sitting through this. This is the first time I've given this talk. I've been working on something for a while, which is a new way of looking at how you build apps. And we're going to talk about that. But there's two separate parts. There's the ideas, which can translate to anything, and I move my hands around a lot. The other part is Flint framework, which is an open source Swift framework that I made and released here, in fact, or announced here on June the 28th this year. Carl invited me over there, and I gave a very garbled little explanation at that point. Anyway, first of all, I'm going to start off with who I am. Marc Palmer, I'm a contractor. I've been doing all kinds of stuff for a long time. I have my own apps that make me no money, and I also work for people who make money out of their apps and pay me, which is great. And I made the Flint framework, obviously, this year. Now, I also am now the lead iOS designer on this app, which you may recognize. It's a well-established, I think about 5-year-old iPad and now iPhone drawing application called Concepts, which is a nice little thing. You should check it out sometime. The UI is going to get a lot cooler. So. Okay, the ideas. What we're going to talk about is building apps from features. Now, all your apps have features, but if I asked any of you, could you list, just like that, every feature in your app? Would anyone be able to do that? No. You can. Excellent. Is it a massive app? Thank you. Outlier. Thank you. So, to me, that's quite an embarrassing thing. Because if we don't really know everything that's there, how are we making sure that everything works properly and that it's all tested properly? How do we market it effectively if we don't think about all those things? But this isn't about marketing, this is about everything, through the whole stack, through product design right down to actually coding it. So this is no lie, I can remember the time I first started thinking about this. It literally was 2002. I hadn't had any children, I didn't look like this. And I was a Java developer at the time. I was dealing with crashes, couldn't tell what the hell was going on, stack traces. I thought, this cannot be right. Why can't I tell what is going wrong? What was the user doing at this point? All I can see is, it's crashing in some obscure little runtime library, but it doesn't tell me anything about the true nature of the problem, which again, for me, is a very embarrassing problem. I think we should be trying to do better. And last year, when I started building Flint, I finally cracked what I think are the ideas I needed to create Flint. I'd just been through working for a startup for 3.5 years, loads of Objective-C with conditional defines and different feature flags, runtime checking of stuff, all kinds of things, releasing features that were disabled but are still in production code, all that kind of stuff. If you've done that, you know it's dicey at best. And there are frameworks out there to help you do this kind of thing, but really what you're dealing with is just Boolean flags and A/B flagging, and you've got to make sure you check everything in the right places in the code. It's not a great way to go about things. Not to mention permissions checking on iOS, before you can do anything with location and so on, you've got to verify that you can actually do that stuff, and it's non-trivial to achieve these things. So, what do I mean when I say features? I've been thinking about this and how to explain it to people for at least 6 months now. Because to me, it's quite obvious. Of course, conveying it to other people is tricky. And I think this is the best that I can come up with, which is, this is fancy, but it's a bit like moving a drunk person around. It's a bit strange. So yeah, things your app can do. So another way to think about this is, in your car dashboard, you have switches. Those are all the things that your app can do, okay? So that might include a sharing feature, or onboarding, which isn't so much a feature for the user, perhaps, but is often a very important feature for us making the app. Authentication is a feature, but it can have sub-features. So sign in, if you've ever had to implement this, and I'm sure most of you have, this is in a sense a feature of your app. You have to be able to sign in to whatever it is. You might have multiple ones, so you have to social sign in. Signing out is a feature. It'll have its own screens associated with it, its own flows, and sign up and so on. password recovery as well. Another example, feeds, so Twitter browser, Instagram client, that kind of thing. You're going to browse through something, you can create a post, you can view a post. But now we come to actions, which are the things that users do with the features in your app, okay? These are the only two concepts I need you to learn, features and actions, and what I mean by them. So this is, let's see, with authentication, say we're on the sign-in sub-feature of your authentication feature. Conceptually, this is all abstract. You have things like showing it, submitting, and cancelling. Okay, so you have a feed you might browse. You're in the browse feature of your feed feature, and you may refresh it, or you may load more. That kind of thing. But like I said, these are just ideas, but it's important to grasp those because those exist inherently in all of our apps. I think everyone will be agreed. We've all got that kind of stuff, but we don't talk about it in these terms. And that's very important because this is how we communicate with everybody through the stack of making the app, okay? We need to do all of this, and we're often filling in the gaps implicitly ourselves because we'll get a flat plan of how a screen should look, and then we go and code it. But there's all this stuff, this translation that we do. We make assumptions, or we go and ask people over and over again for further little details of how things should actually work. And yet, if you said to the designers, are we done now? Have we built everything? Are all the features covered? They probably don't even know. You know, how many design or product design departments have you worked with where they have a literal flat plan of every single feature? Usually there's some willingness in there. It's like, yeah, well, you know, just do what we did before. You know, just copy that. You may be wondering, well, you probably are, why do I think this is so important? Well, if you use it, you can get cleaner code. You can deal with all this feature flagging nonsense and permissions and all this kind of thing that you have to have in most apps. For your own little indie app, maybe not, but if you want to do a solid job, you're probably going to hit these things. Debugging becomes easier because your app and your code can know what the user is actually doing and it can report that to you. At the moment, you'll just type some logging in, if you remember, and it'll be sketchy, it won't be consistent like your other logging. You can get your analytics for free, because if you have a structured way to perform an action, then every time that happens, it can do the right analytics reporting, okay, whatever that is. And a special thing that Flint covers, and I'm sure this would apply to something like Android as well and Windows, you can get better integration with the native platform that you run on, so that in Apple case, for example, we can do handoff and other continuity kind of features automatically for you when you perform actions. So, I haven't done time on this at all, so I'm from dragging on. Put this into practice. Yeah, there's only 3 parts, so don't get worried. It is a large subject, and this is very brief. So putting it into practice using Flint. So this is what Flint is. It's an open source framework, pure Swift. It has no dependencies, which is nice. And it's built cross-platform for all Apple platforms, even the watch and tvOS. So we could write the next version of Minecraft. And so this is what it looks like to create the high-level features in an application. This is taken from the demo application source from a Flint demo project. We're not going to go into the details of code. You don't need to know Swift to understand this. All I'm doing is showing you that you have a top-level type called features in your app, and then you put your top-level, in fact I'll do that, there we go, your top-level features, okay? So this is a demo app that lets you create notes. So it's creating, deleting, sharing, all that kind of thing. When you actually use, when you want to use an action, this is what you do. So in your code, this might be in, if you're using view controllers, if you're old-fashioned like me and most iOS developers, you may have a function like this for when the user pulls down, and then you call the refresh actions perform method on that feature. So here in your code, you can see, if you just dive into your code, you can see what actions are occurring in your code, and that seems quite silly, but often if you're given a new code base, if someone says, oh, go and look at the open document feature, what the hell is it? You know, you've got to dig around. So even at this source level, it gives you a simple way to find where things are used to aid refactoring and so on. So an action in Flint terms and in kind of the feature-oriented development terminology, I suppose. And someone said it should be feature design driven development, but I'm not sure about that myself. So it's essentially a functional idea. It takes an input, takes a presenter, and it returns an outcome. It's not a result, it's a success or failure outcome. The idea is that your presenter deals with actually showing what happened. So you can imagine you have an action with a perform method like this, and all it's going to do is call into some component you have that manages the feed to refresh it. It'll tell the presenter to show a busy animation, and then it'll say, I'm done. They're very, very small pieces of code. But the magic is you have to remember, if you build this in properly and you have the same pattern everywhere, then you can have something that hooks into this performing to do your analytics reporting automatically, do your logging automatically, all manner of great stuff. So, a presenter can be anything you like, okay? It really doesn't matter. In the context of the Flint framework, it doesn't care. There's no requirement at all. It's just a type, okay? And this means you're not stuck to using MVC or any kind of reactive model or anything. It's completely orthogonal to that because you're essentially just calling one function that goes and does the action. So what this gives you is something that is much more testable for your basic business logic. So if you have a sharing feature and you perform the share action, you give it the thing to share, you give it the presenter where it will report progress of the share and so on. You can actually test that it's hitting all the right parts. You can put mocks in if you need to and so on. It's a nice simple model. And this is the most interesting part, is the conditional features, because some features you can always access. You know, onboarding, for example, that'll always be there, yeah? But sharing might be behind an in-app purchase. Okay, so it's a conditional feature. And in Flint, I've called these constraints on features. And they give you all of this kind of stuff that we've talked about already. Platform versions is, you know, this feature, if you have a common code base, this feature can run on watchOS 4, and it can run on iOS 10, but it can't run on macOS. So, the key thing here is, if you're going to make something like this or use Flint, you want to make it so you can't perform any actions of a feature unless all those conditions are met. And in Flint, we've done that using the Swift type system, so it's actually impossible to call perform. You can't get an object you can perform an action on from a conditional feature. You first have to request permission to do that. Permission is not the right word, but you have to request access to it, and it will deny it and force you to cover the failure case. If you imagine doing this in Objective-C, or say JavaScript, some kind of untyped system, you're going to have a lot of possibilities where you can circumvent the system basically, and you'll get a developer in who's an intern or whatever, and they'll just start calling things all over the place. They won't be bothering to check if the feature's actually enabled or not. So this is what that looks like in Swift and Flint. We have a browse feed feature. We check the refresh action to see if we can do it. And we get an object back here. And if we are allowed to do it, then we can call perform on it with the presenter, which is much like the non-conditional features before, but it's just delegated to a different object. And there we have the error handling, customary error handling. We'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. So anytime you want to perform a feature in your code, perform an action of a feature in your code, if it's a conditional feature, you're forced to do that because a browse, oh, it's changed, look at that. Yeah, back again, James Bond. Cool, isn't it? So the browse feed feature is a conditional feature. And any action you get from it, because of Swift magic and a lot of protocol-associated type pain on my part, you cannot directly perform them. It just won't work. It won't even compile if you try to do refresh.perform. It's just not going to happen. Okay, so You're probably all thinking this, hopefully. If anyone's got it not following yet, it's okay, you can ask a question. Time? 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Really good. Do you want to go now? It's all right. This is good because we're about halfway through part 2. So, here we go. Now, you may still be thinking that, okay? Hopefully some of you are starting to go, I can sort of see where he's going, but I don't fancy using it myself. Right, this is where it gets fun. I already mentioned you're logging at the moment. Now, how many of you can look at logs that are captured from your app in development or production and really tell what the user was actually doing? It's probably quite, yes, excellent, one winner.
I wants to know that sort of thing because putting Google Analytics calls.
Yes, yes, but then try tying up the analytics to the rest of your logging. That's the tricky part, isn't it?
We just don't hit console at the same time as we do Google Analytics calls.
Oh, that sounds fine, yeah. So yeah, this is the thing that frustrated me 15, 16, 17 years ago, okay? You know, you couldn't tell what was going on. It's fine to have all the logging frameworks that exist in humanity, but you're still not getting particularly useful information. And I don't know about you, but certainly on my last project, we had loads of networking stuff going on. That was a C++ framework, streams of logging coming out all the time. We couldn't look at the logs, it wasn't useful anymore. Everyone was just pissed off because it was compiled into, compiled to be a certain logging level, it was just a nightmare. So, runtime control is also, runtime control of logging levels is something you don't typically see in client frameworks. You only see it in back-end stuff normally. And so I wanted to bring a little flavour of that over because I think even in development or if you're doing internal testing, you should be able to toggle your logging level up and down if you're trying to troubleshoot a specific problem. You can have a little bit of development UI in your app to achieve that. So, contextual logging is what Flint gives you. It uses the features and action stuff so that when actions happen, your logging has context. So if you think about what we had before, in an action we have the input and the presenter that's happening. We know an action belongs to a feature. Features can be in a hierarchy. So what we get here is something that looks a bit like this. We have, use that again. This part here is like a path. That's the feature hierarchy. So that's the browse feature of the feed feature. And the part with the anchor or hashtag is the action. Okay? So if we follow through here, we can see the user refreshed. It started it and it completed with success. They did load more and so on. They looked at the profile and then they saved it. Yeah, this is the kind of logging you get out of a system like this. Of course, you can have all your other logging in there as well. But when your subsystems do logging, they can receive this context. So later on, you can gather all of it together into the same. Essentially, it's like a chat transcript. It's rather than being linear, you can group things together as conversations. Anyway, you can then also do things like focusing on specific areas that are problematic in your code. So you'll say, I just want to look at all the stuff to do with the feed in real time. So or even at compile time, you can say, let's just do that. Because that's the thing we're struggling with. So if you have a problem in production, your clients are in Russia, you don't know how to actually communicate with them, and you need to do a special build that traces the problems, you can do that kind of thing. So of course that's really useful when things go wrong. You can have a cyclic timeline buffer of the logging and attach that to your crash reports. Very handy thing to have. I have used that in anger, not with Flint, but at a previous client, the Fabric and Crashlytics CLS log stuff. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's only a 64K buffer. So we had to turn off all other logging to be able to get anything useful and put special logging in, essentially of this form, to say, oh, the user just did this and did that, to isolate a problem in production. But the other benefit is, if you have all of this detailed logging and stuff going on at a high level, with the high level features and actions, your test people can create repro steps from these logs, which is a very hard thing to do from any normal logs. So, that's the first thing, that's the sell to devs, yeah, pretty much. But then there's more. It's more interesting. This is the least interesting part. Analytics. Now, you set normally you report an analytics event ID and some arguments. In Flint, all you do is set this property on your action, and it's done. Yeah, if you've plugged in your own analytics provider, when you perform actions, it'll automatically report stuff. You can customize the attributes by overriding another function, but it's really, really simple, and you can never not report the analytic when you perform the action. I've seen so much code where stuff is going on all over the place in different view controllers, but it's the same thing. So don't do that, okay? Don't do that. Even if you don't use Flint, don't do that. Just centralize your stuff. NS user activity is how handoff and continuity stuff works in iOS. Very, very interesting. Most people don't implement these features, okay? A bit of a pain in the arse, a bit hard to understand. But again, if you indicate that your action supports some of the eligibility requirements of NS user activity, they'll just do it for you. So you can essentially get handoff and stuff for free. There's a caveat there. It's very nice. So, another common thing, URL handling, custom URL schemes, deep linking, pain in the bum to implement again. You've got to get your user interface into the right state. I can't really help with that. That's always a bit of fun. But you combine the URLs to actions. You can then be asked to move the UI into the right state by Flint, and then it will perform the action for you. So you have very minimal code to do this, and all you do is set up a URL mapping in your feature for where you want to go when the URL comes in. Going very fast now. Preconditions. This is the stuff we talked about earlier, platform requirements, feature toggling, all that kind of stuff. We have a constraints builder on features. So there you go, you can see this feature is only going to run on iOS 10. It supports user toggling in settings preferences, and runtime enabled means it'll actually ask to see if it's enabled at runtime. Okay. So permissions, this is the fun stuff on iOS. Camera access, photos access, location access, all those good things. You just define something like that, and it will not allow you to perform those actions for those features that require those. So you can mix these up in really complex ways that you wouldn't normally consider, and that avoids the problem of people being prompted for permissions right at the start when they run your app. You know, and you have to start thinking about, oh, well, are we going to ask for like authorization on this only when I get to this view controller and so on? Forget about all of it and think about the features. We also, sorry, I'm just going to go back there. We also have great handling for when the permissions have not been granted, it'll drive a controller that will ask your app for what UI you want to show each stage before they get asked for permission. So you can get a really high quality onboarding experience. Yes, in-app purchases. That's it. Essentially, the huge amount of hand waving going on here though. Like this, because I haven't implemented the purchase validator yet, but you can write your own one. But the mechanism is there to hierarchies of purchases, in-app purchases, and all that stuff. And again, they won't be able to use the feature unless it's available because they purchased it. You can put them all together in something like this. So this is constraints on a single feature. So we've got OS restrictions here. We have user preferences, runtime checking that might hook into your backend A/B testing if you need that, purchases and permissions. But if we just take, sorry, where are we? There we go. There. Imagine having to implement all of that from scratch. That you don't have to implement any of that now if you use something like this. Okay? I don't know if you've ever had to do that, it's really painful. All the failure cases are just a nightmare. Okay. Lots more. I'm working on Siri shortcut support and Siri intent support. Someone very wise suggested undo managers. I don't fully understand them on macOS. They're a bit weird. They barely exist on iOS, I think. But it's a good candidate for that. Notification support would be really nice to hook that into features and actions as well, and the permission stuff. There's plenty to do. I haven't reached a full 1.0 yet, and some of the things I've mentioned have heavy caveats behind them. But I'm shipping code with this in. And I built this to build my own apps. I'm not going to build apps a normal way anymore because I've been doing this for many months now. Okay, so that's it. There's a Slack, there's me on Twitter. stickers and things. And anyone who expresses the faintest interest may get a t-shirt, which is great. Thank you very
Are
much.
you coming to the pub after?
I am.
Cool. I think we'll have to take questions there.
Fine.
Time and getting down.